He challenged her to a fight, thinking she was just a woman. But what happened on the tatami silenced the entire hall. Subscribe so you don't miss any new stories. Write in the comments where you're watching from. The town of Alder Creek wasn't known for much. It had a single grocery store, 2 gas stations, and a diner that still served pancakes with real butter. Nestled at the edge of the Pacific Northwest, it was the kind of place where no one asked too many questions and people lived their whole lives without needing to be anyone but themselves. That was exactly what Ronda Rousey needed. She arrived without fanfare. No press, no posters, no entourage. Just a battered pickup truck, a gym bag, and a quiet determination in her eyes. Her name was still Ronda. She never saw the point in hiding it. But her presence didn't draw attention. In a town like Alder Creek, people saw what they expected to see. A tired woman in her 30s, possibly divorced, looking for a fresh start. They couldn't have been more wrong. Her days were simple. She took a job at a local youth center, teaching self-defense classes to teenage girls. The work was fulfilling, but it wasn't why she was here. Every evening, just after the sun dipped below the treetops, she walked the 4 blocks to a squat, windowless building with faded lettering above the door. Red Valley Dojo, traditional martial arts training. It was the only martial arts school in town. She signed up without ceremony. No long introductions, no hint of her past. When asked about her experience, she said she had some training. The receptionist glanced at her stocky frame, the calm in her eyes, and nodded absently. He had seen enough bored moms and fitness seekers come and go. The first thing she noticed inside the dojo was the silence. Not the disciplined kind that marked real dojos, but a tense kind, heavy and waiting. There was a hierarchy here, built not on skill, but intimidation. Men stood straighter when one particular voice echoed across the mats, and women shrank into the corners. That voice belonged to Harvey Lawson. Harvey wore his red belt like a crown. He was broad, in his late 40s, with thinning hair slicked back and a jaw set like he'd been grinding his teeth for years. He strutted through the room like a general surveying his troops, correcting stances with quick snaps of his fingers, demanding louder shouts with every strike, and rewarding his favorite students, mostly young men, with nods of approval or smirking praise. His treatment of the women was different, subtler but pointed. When they sparred, he'd scoff. When they stretched, he lingered. His hands corrected postures that didn't need correcting. He made comments about their hips, their balance, their fragility, and no one said a word. Ronda entered the space like smoke, present yet unnoticed. She wore simple black leggings and a plain tank top, her hair tied in a rough knot. She kept to the back, moved when told, mirrored forms and drills with quiet efficiency. She didn't outshine. She didn't challenge. She just observed. It was almost meditative, the way she absorbed the rhythm of the place. But beneath that calm, her instincts were alert. It didn't take long for Harvey to notice her. She could feel his eyes within the first week, scrutinizing her in between barked orders. He didn't know who she was, that much was clear, but he couldn't ignore the way she moved. Too balanced, too quiet, too confident. It irritated him. "She looks like she's stretching for yoga, not training to fight," he sneered once to a senior student loud enough for Ronda to hear. She didn't flinch, just finished her stance and moved on. He watched, waiting for a reaction that never came. That silence, that refusal to be provoked, it chipped away at him. On her 3rd week, during a paired drill, he stopped the class. "Hey, new girl," he called out, snapping his fingers. "You, yeah, try that again. But this time, Act like you're not dancing in a ballet class." The room laughed, mostly the men. A few women looked down. Ronda didn't respond. She repeated the movement, this time with less precision, a hint of awkwardness, just enough to satisfy his ego. It worked. He moved on. He saw what he wanted to see. Another woman playing tough, but Ronda saw everything. The way girls in the dojo deferred, how their voices dropped when he passed. She watched one young woman, maybe 19, flinch when Harvey came near. Another never made eye contact. One girl disappeared entirely after her first sparring session. No one mentioned her name. Still, Ronda said nothing. She wasn't here to be a hero. She was here to heal. She returned day after day, kept her head down, listened, watched, waited. But Harvey couldn't leave it alone. Each session he pushed further, gave her the heaviest partners, assigned her the least experienced students during drills, made casual comments about her thick arms and strong back, always with a laugh. And every time Ronda met it with a shrug, a small nod, a cool indifference that made him grind his teeth. It infuriated him. He thrived on power, but she wouldn't give him any. One evening, he called for demonstrations, picked 3 men to perform basic forms, then turned to Ronda and smirked. "New girl," he said. "Let's see what you've learned. Try not to embarrass yourself." She stepped onto the mat silently. The other students watched, a few of them smirking, expecting a clumsy show. What they got was a fluid, exact performance. Her form was perfect, too perfect, but at the end she bowed and returned to the line without a word. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment before Harvey cleared his throat and clapped once. "Not bad," he muttered. Then louder, "Let's not get cocky." That night, Harvey watched her leave with narrowed eyes. Something about her wasn't adding up. The next evening, he pushed further, partnered her with a student known for being aggressive. The man landed an elbow too close to her jaw. Ronda didn't flinch. She didn't retaliate. She just reset and continued. Again and again, she absorbed hits, adjusted, kept moving. Cool, quiet, still. He couldn't break her. And that's when the idea struck him. Not to humiliate her in drills or with comments, but to do it in front of everyone once and for all. A demonstration, a match, a public display. He'd invite the whole dojo to watch. Strip away whatever mask she was hiding behind. Put her in her place. She wouldn't dare say no. And when she did say yes, that would be the beginning of his fall and her silent storm. The days that followed passed like beads on a frayed string, each one tense, taut, and unspoken. Ronda kept showing up to the dojo exactly on time, never early, never late. She moved with the same silent purpose, as if rehearsing a private meditation no one else could hear. But inside, she was watching. Harvey Lawson intensified his campaign of control. With every class, his remarks grew sharper, laced with venom disguised as humor. He barked corrections at Ronda twice as often as anyone else. "Try using your hips. Unless you left them at home," he'd sneer. "You've got the mass. Now just figure out the movement." She gave him nothing, not even a glance. His needling became more physical. During stretches, he would adjust her posture by pressing on her back or hips, always longer than necessary, always with a smirk. Around them, the other students either looked away or feigned focus. The air in the dojo had become a fog of complicity. What Harvey didn't understand was that Ronda had known men like him her entire career. Some had walked into the octagon. Some had worn suits and handed out contracts. Some had stood behind podiums with microphones. All of them had something to prove, and none of them had lasted long. But she wasn't here to fight. Not yet. In the shadows of the dojo, Ronda had made quiet connections. One of them was with a girl named Ashley, a wiry 16-year-old with calloused hands and eyes too serious for her age. Ashley never spoke unless spoken to, but she lingered near Ronda after class, watched her with a curious wariness. One evening, after class had ended and most of the students had filtered out, Ashley approached Ronda near the lockers. Her voice was barely audible. "You don't talk much." Ronda offered a faint smile. "Neither do you." Ashley hesitated, then suddenly, "He's been like this forever. We had another girl here, Elena. She was one of the best. He humiliated her in front of everyone. Said she wasn't built for martial arts. She quit a week later." Ronda didn't respond, but Ashley could feel something shift in her presence. Not anger, not surprise. Something colder, heavier, like a door beginning to close. That night, Ronda stood in front of her bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth, staring at the faded bruises along her forearms, marks from drills where Harvey had demonstrated too hard. She ran a towel over the skin, felt the familiar ache, and looked herself in the eye. Still, she told herself, not yet. But Harvey's need for control was growing insatiable. 2 nights later, he assigned Ronda to spar with Jake, a 22-year-old wrestler turned martial arts student who trained like a wrecking ball. Harvey stood at the side of the mat, arms crossed, barking instructions with a sly grin. "Come on, Jake, don't be shy. Show her how it's done." Jake didn't need encouragement. He came in hot, full speed, stiff kicks, hammer fists. Ronda evaded most of it with ease, moving just enough to avoid contact. But he clipped her shoulder once, then her thigh. She let it happen. Harvey clapped. "That's it. Keep it up, son. You'll wear her down. Let's see if she's got anything under that tough girl act." After the match, Jake swaggered off and Ronda sat in silence, wrapping her wrist tighter than necessary. Her composure never cracked, but the dojo was beginning to whisper. One girl turned to another after class. "Why does she keep letting him treat her like that?" she whispered. "Is she afraid?" "No," Ashley replied quietly from behind them. "She's waiting." Harvey had noticed it too. The way people watched Ronda now, not with scorn, but curiosity. Even some of the younger men were beginning to hold back their laughter at his jokes. That terrified him more than he could admit. So he decided to end it. A public challenge. That was the only way. The following week, he announced a special class. Demonstration night, he called it. Bring your friends. We'll show you what real martial arts looks like. He sent emails to parents, printed flyers, even called in a few local reporters who'd covered the dojo's regional competitions before. He wanted a crowd, an audience to see him put this silent woman in her place. Humiliate her cleanly, professionally, and completely. The day before the event, during the final class, Harvey stood before the students with his usual swagger. He wore his red belt like a general's sash, his arms folded across his chest. "Tomorrow," he said, pacing slowly in front of the lineup, "we'll be holding a brief demonstration, a little sparring, just a taste of what separates masters from amateurs." Then he stopped, turned directly toward Ronda. "And I think our most determined beginner deserves the spotlight." The room fell silent. Ronda didn't blink. "I'm fine with that." A few students exchanged surprised glances. Ashley's eyes widened, but Ronda never looked her way. Harvey's grin was triumphant. "Good, then it's settled." Later that night, as the room emptied and the students filed out, Ronda lingered by the door. Harvey passed her, leaning in just enough to let his words snake toward her ear. "Don't worry, I'll be gentle." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked out into the night, the weight of the coming moment pressing into her spine like a coiled spring. She walked home in silence, but her breath was steady, her body calm. She opened the closet in her small apartment, reached into the back, pulled out a long-forgotten duffel bag. Inside was a black G worn at the seams, a pair of hand wraps still crusted with sweat from a fight long ago, and, at the very bottom, her UFC gloves. She held them in her hands for a long time. The red belt didn't know it yet, but he had just declared war. And Ronda Rousey didn't lose wars. Morning light seeped through the blinds of Ronda's apartment, painting soft lines across the walls. She was already awake, seated on the floor with her legs folded beneath her, her back straight and eyes closed. Her breath moved slowly, deliberately, as if syncing her body to the calm rhythm she'd need to carry through the day. In her lap lay the worn-out hand wraps she had pulled from her duffel the night before. She hadn't used them in years. The bloodstains were long faded, but the weight of each fiber still held memory, of octagons, of screaming crowds, of impact and triumph and grief. She didn't miss the fame, but she had missed this feeling, the moment before a fight where stillness becomes a blade. Outside, Alder Creek woke slowly. Children trailed behind their parents to school. Dogs barked at squirrels, and the old man who ran the hardware store unlocked his door with the same ritual he'd performed for 20 years. The town was quiet, innocent. It had no idea what was coming. At noon, Ronda walked the length of the town, her hair tied back in its usual knot, her clothes as unremarkable as always. She stopped by the youth center to check in with the girls she coached, helping them with pad work, correcting their form gently. There was no hint of tension in her posture, no change in her tone. To them, she was Miss Ronda, strong, kind, patient. They had no idea that tonight she would remind someone exactly what that strength really meant. Back at the dojo, preparations were underway. Harvey had gone all in. He'd set up folding chairs along the perimeter of the mats. He made sure the lights were bright and even. He'd even bought a cheap mic system, which now stood in the corner, humming softly with static. A local reporter stood near the door, flipping through a notepad, already bored. Harvey was in his element. He strutted around the room, greeting students, shaking hands with a few parents, flashing his red belt like a trophy. He wore his finest gi, crisp, white, embroidered with a dragon across the back. Everything about him screamed control. His students lined up along the mat. Ashley sat near the back, quiet, pale, her fingers nervously twisting the end of her sleeve. She hadn't spoken to Ronda all week. She hadn't needed to. As the room filled, Ronda arrived without announcement. She wore a plain gi, no patches, no colors, no rank. Her belt was black but unadorned. To the untrained eye, she looked like any other quiet martial artist. Her steps were even, her face unreadable. People watched her enter, more curious than impressed. A few whispered, "That's the woman he's sparring? She looks normal. Is she even trained?" Harvey called for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the mic, his voice bouncing off the dojo walls, "thank you all for coming to this special demonstration. Tonight is about showing what real martial arts look like. Technique, discipline, power, and most importantly, humility." He smirked. "And what better way to demonstrate that than a little sparring between instructor and student?" He turned toward Ronda. "Miss Rousey," he said, stressing the name, "are you ready?" Ronda stepped onto the mat and gave a short nod. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. "Remember," Harvey continued for the crowd, This is not a fight. This is an instructional match. I'll be going easy. Don't want anyone getting hurt." Laughter rippled through the room. The two bowed, then the mat fell silent. Harvey began with flash. He moved with speed, snapping his limbs through practice strikes. He threw quick, high kicks that stopped inches from her face. He spun, landed softly, and looked at the crowd as if to say, "See?" Ronda didn't move. She stood relaxed, eyes locked on him, absorbing every step, every feint, every twitch of muscle. He circled her like a predator, his voice smug. "This is what control looks like," he narrated, throwing a combination that whooshed past her shoulder. "Notice the balance, the—" Ronda took a half step back. That was all. Harvey faltered slightly. His second strike missed not by a hair, but by space. Still, he pushed forward, increasing speed. He threw low kicks, pivoted to high ones, swept his arm for a fake elbow. But every strike found air. Ronda moved minimally, but with uncanny precision like a shadow just out of reach. The crowd grew quiet. They were seeing something they didn't understand. Harvey frowned. His footwork became heavier. He advanced again, this time with real intent. The blows came harder now, less show, more power. One strike aimed directly for her midsection. Ronda twisted, letting it pass. His hand grazed the edge of her gi. His face reddened. "Come on," he snapped, dropping the performance. "You afraid to hit back?" Ronda remained silent. Her eyes were cold now, not angry, just focused. She saw everything. His stance weakening, his breath quickening, the swelling flush of his ego turning to frustration. The audience held its breath. Ashley leaned forward, her hands gripping her knees. Harvey growled. He lunged. This time, he meant to hit her. A straight punch tore through the air, but Ronda was already gone, tilted just far enough for the punch to miss. He followed with a spinning heel kick, fast and powerful. She pivoted. The kick passed inches from her face. Harvey landed off balance. Sweat dripped from his brow. "What is this?" he barked. "Move, fight," Ronda answered for the first time, her voice low, steady, slicing through the silence. "I thought this was a demonstration." He charged. The crowd flinched. Ronda stepped aside. Harvey's momentum carried him too far. He stumbled, caught himself, turned with a snarl. He struck again. Again, she slipped the blow. Then again. Nothing. Not one hit connected. People were sitting forward in their chairs now. Phones were out. Fingers hovered over record buttons. Whispers spread. She's not even trying. She's not afraid of him. Who is she? Harvey was drenched in sweat now. His GI clung to his back. His movements were jerky, rushed, angry. The red belt had forgotten everything but his pride. He threw a desperate elbow. Ronda dipped under it. Then, finally, she moved. Not an attack, just a shift of her stance. It was subtle, but it changed the atmosphere of the room. She was done watching. Harvey came in again, teeth clenched, hands wide, and Ronda let him. Just for a moment. Then, with a single pivot, she reached out and touched the back of his knee, a soft, surgical tap. Harvey's balance collapsed. He fell backward with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. Gasps filled the air. He lay there, stunned, eyes wide, chest heaving. Ronda stood over him, calm and still. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then Ashley rose to her feet. She began to clap. One by one, others joined her. The sound built wave by wave until the dojo shook with applause. Harvey stared up at the ceiling, his pride shattered in full view of every student, parent, and guest he had invited to witness his triumph. Ronda looked down at him. Not with glee, not with smugness, with pity. She turned away and walked to the edge of the mat. No pose, no bow, just the quiet certainty of a storm that had passed through and left everything changed. For the first time since anyone could remember, Harvey Lawson didn't speak. He sat on the edge of the mat with his elbows resting on his knees, head bowed, sweat trailing down his temples. The roar of applause still echoed in the corners of the dojo, but none of it was for him. His students, those who once hung on every command, now looked at him with something between pity and confusion. Others avoided his gaze entirely. The demonstration was over, but its impact was just beginning to unfurl. Ronda stood near the entrance, her GI now slightly wrinkled from movement, but her breathing was still perfectly even. Her face was unreadable, though her gaze occasionally drifted toward Ashley, who stood with arms crossed, head high, her eyes shining with something she hadn't felt in this dojo for a long time. Hope. It took Harvey several long moments to rise. When he did, it wasn't with the proud posture of a red belt master, but with the slow, stiff movements of a man who had just seen his carefully curated world collapse under its own weight. He tried to say something, anything, but his voice caught in his throat. He cleared it with a forced cough, tried again. He began, staring at the crowd. I wasn't expecting. No one filled the silence for him. From the back, a quiet voice broke through. It was the young reporter, pen still in hand. Sir, who exactly is she? Harvey turned toward Ronda. Everyone followed his gaze. She stepped forward, not to gloat, not to pose, but simply to speak. My name is Ronda Rousey. A collective intake of breath filled the dojo like a gust of wind. Someone gasped. A woman near the corner dropped her phone. No way, whispered a teenager near the front row. Others reached for their phones, frantically searching. Within seconds, her name populated every screen. Videos of UFC fights, headlines, highlight reels, interviews. There she was, hoisting championship belts, locking opponents in arm bars, finishing fights in seconds. A young boy read aloud, 3-time UFC champion, Olympic medalist. The room was stunned, not because they had been tricked, but because they hadn't seen her. They hadn't seen the strength behind the quiet, the fire behind the restraint, the discipline behind the silence. And that, Ronda knew, was exactly the point. Harvey swayed slightly where he stood. Ronda walked toward him, not aggressively, not with confrontation, but with the solemn authority of someone who had given him more than one chance to act right. He looked up at her, face pale. I didn't know, he said weakly. That was the problem, Ronda replied. The crowd fell silent again. Ashley stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. She didn't have to be famous for you to treat her with respect. Others nodded. Some of the older students looked at the floor, visibly ashamed. The parents exchanged glances. The younger girls, who had spent months avoiding eye contact, afraid to speak out, now stood taller. Harvey took a deep breath. His voice trembled. I was wrong. It was barely a whisper, then louder, addressing the crowd. I was wrong. I let my pride run this place. I thought control was strength. I judged people by what I assumed they couldn't do, and I let it poison everything. He turned back to Ronda. I owe you a public apology, not because you're famous, but because you endured what no student should have to. Ronda didn't answer right away. She looked at him not with forgiveness yet, but with gravity. Then she nodded once. You owe that apology to all of them, she said, motioning toward the room. And Harvey did. One by one, he looked at the faces he had once mocked, ignored, or subtly dismissed. He apologized to Ashley. He apologized to a mother who had removed her daughter from the dojo months ago. He apologized to the students of color, to the girls he had called fragile, to the boys he had trained to believe that force was everything. Each apology felt heavier than the last, but he delivered them all. By the time he was done, his voice had cracked, and sweat wasn't the only thing glistening on his face. Then, without ceremony, Harvey removed the red belt from his waist. He stood in the center of the mat and placed it on the ground. I'll earn it again, if I can. This time, the right way. Silence. Then slow, tentative applause. But this time, it wasn't for Ronda. It was for the moment itself, for the crack in a system too long unchallenged, for the possibility of something better. Ronda stood at the edge of the crowd, not seeking acknowledgement. She turned to leave, but just as she stepped away, Ashley called out, "Wait!" Ronda turned. Ashley walked up to her, a tremble in her jaw. "I want to say thank you. You didn't have to do this, but you did." "I didn't do it for thanks," Ronda said softly. Ashley smiled. "I know. That's why it mattered." From the back, someone murmured, "Silent storm." The words floated across the mat like a whisper through wind. Ronda gave a small smile, just enough to show she'd heard it. Outside, the sun was dipping low behind the tree line, casting golden light through the dojo windows. The air smelled of sweat, wood polish, and something new: respect. Ronda stepped through the doors into the fading evening, not as a champion, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had taught a lesson too many had forgotten: that real power doesn't raise its voice. It just waits for the right moment. And when it moves, it doesn't need to prove anything. It simply reminds the world what dignity looks like. In the days that followed, something unspoken shifted inside Red Valley Dojo. Not just the air or the routine of the place, but the very atmosphere. The invisible hierarchy that once shaped every interaction, every movement, every silence between instructor and student. It wasn't immediate, nor was it loud. It didn't come with speeches or announcements, but it came. Harvey Lawson returned the next day, not in his usual pristine GI, but in simple sweatpants and a t-shirt. The red belt remained folded in his duffel bag. When he stepped onto the mat, there was no bark in his voice, no commanding presence. He greeted each student with a nod, offered corrections gently, and never once raised his tone. There were no sarcastic comments, no lingering hands, no dismissive glances. He moved like a man trying to relearn the world. His apologies from that night lingered in everyone's minds. For the younger students, especially the girls who had once tried to disappear into the corners of the dojo, it meant everything. They came to class with their chins a little higher, their voices a little stronger. They began to ask questions, to challenge themselves, to believe they belonged. For Harvey, the process of redemption was slow. He couldn't erase what he had done. The girls he had driven out, the trust he had broken, the lessons he had twisted. But he could change what came next. He started arriving early to open the doors and stayed late to clean the mats himself. He read books on leadership, humility, gender bias in sports. He asked students for feedback, even when it was uncomfortable to hear. One afternoon, he stood in front of the class and admitted, "I've been training my whole life, but last week I learned more in 10 minutes than in the last 10 years. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't eloquent, but it was real, and for the first time his words didn't carry weight because of his belt, but because of his sincerity." Meanwhile, Ronda didn't return to the dojo for a full week. She kept to her routine, taught her classes at the youth center, walked the same streets, ate at the same diner. But now, people looked at her differently. Not with curiosity, but with quiet awe. Even those who had never set foot inside Red Valley Dojo had heard the story. Videos had made their way online. Articles were shared and reshared. Headlines read, "Former UFC champion teaches local instructor a lesson in humility." But Ronda avoided the attention. She ignored interviews, declined podcast invitations, and let the storm settle. When she finally did return, it wasn't during a class, but in the early evening, just as the sun cast long shadows through the glass. She wore her usual black leggings and hoodie, her hair tied back in its effortless knot. Ashley was there alone, practicing slow drills with steady precision. Ronda watched her quietly for a few moments before stepping inside. Ashley turned at the sound, her face lighting up. "You're back," she said, setting down the wooden staff she'd been working with. "I never really left," Ronda replied, walking to the edge of the mat. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Ashley offered her the staff, and they began to move together. Slow, rhythmic patterns, the kind that required breath, not strength. The dojo was quiet except for the soft swish of the staff slicing the air and the muted sounds of their feet against the mat. Afterward, Ashley sat on the edge of the floor, catching her breath. "You changed everything," she said. "I didn't," Ronda answered. "You did. All of you." Ashley looked at her. "But you showed us how?" Ronda hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Maybe, but the fight wasn't about me. It was about this place, about what it could be." The next few weeks brought even more changes. Enrollment at the dojo increased, especially among women and younger girls who had previously been too intimidated to join. Parents who had once hesitated now brought their daughters proudly. The culture shifted, subtle but undeniable. Harvey, now no longer the unquestioned authority, encouraged the creation of a student council, a small group of students, including Ashley, tasked with discussing concerns, suggesting changes, and helping shape the future of the dojo. Ronda declined a formal teaching role, but she agreed to hold monthly seminars, not about fighting techniques, but about strength of character, resilience, and ethical practice in martial arts. At the first of these sessions, she stood in front of a packed room. Students of all ages, parents, even a few new instructors. She spoke quietly but clearly. "Martial arts isn't about dominance," she began. "It's about knowing yourself. It's about learning when to act and when to wait, when to strike and when to stand still. It's not about defeating others. It's about refusing to be defeated by what's wrong." There was no performance in her words, no arrogance, just truth. People listened. Harvey stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, not in defiance but in thought. He didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't try to insert himself into her message. He was simply there, to listen, to learn. After the seminar, a few parents approached Ronda, thanking her for what she'd done. One mother said her daughter had never felt safe in a martial arts space before. Another said her son had started asking questions about fairness and equality at home. Ronda smiled politely, but each comment reminded her why she had chosen to act, not for applause, but for change. Ashley, now more confident than ever, began teaching beginner classes under supervision. She incorporated what she had learned from Ronda, not just the technique but the patience, the stillness, the deep listening. Students gravitated to her, they trusted her, they saw in her what they wanted to become. One evening, after teaching a class, Ashley found Ronda standing near the entrance again. They exchanged a look, no words. Ashley walked up and hugged her. Ronda stiffened slightly, not used to the gesture, but then relaxed. "Thank you," Ashley whispered, "for being the person I needed to see." "You're becoming that person, too," Ronda replied. Outside, the evening was warm, the streetlights casting golden halos over the quiet sidewalk. The town buzzed in its usual gentle rhythm. But inside the dojo, something had transformed. It had become more than a place to punch and kick. It had become a space of balance, of reckoning, of rebuilding. As Ronda left the building that night, she turned once to look back through the wide windows. The mats, the wooden beams, the quiet air, they all looked the same. But she knew they weren't. Not anymore. She walked toward home, her hands in her pockets, her steps steady. For all her titles, all her victories, all her years in the spotlight, this chapter had mattered the most. Not because she had won, but because she had reminded others that they didn't have to lose. And in the end, that was the truest victory of all. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos for powerful true justice stories and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.